You don't notice it at first. The fight never starts as a fight. It begins as a shift in the air, a pause that lingers half a second too long, a tone in her voice that feels slightly off. You sense it before you understand it, like the pressure change before a storm. You tell yourself it's nothing, but deep down, your body already knows what's coming, because every argument you've ever had with a woman started the same way, small, almost invisible, then suddenly everywhere. And the strange part is this: you weren't trying to fight. You were trying to fix something. That's where it all goes wrong. Men believe conflict comes from disagreement. Women experience conflict as emotional threat. This single difference is responsible for more fights, breakups, and silent resentments than cheating, money, or sex. You think you're discussing a topic. She feels like the relationship itself is being questioned. You think you're being clear. She hears distance. You think you're calm. She feels you pulling away. And once her nervous system senses that threat, the argument is already over, because now you're no longer talking to her mind. You're dealing with her defenses. Think back to the last argument you had. Notice how fast it escalated. Notice how quickly the original topic disappeared. Dishes turned into respect. A late text turned into you don't care. A boundary turned into you're changing. That escalation wasn't random. It was amplification. Women don't just receive emotional input. They multiply it. A trace of irritation becomes tension. Tension becomes aggression. Aggression becomes chaos. Not because she wants drama, but because her brain is wired to treat emotional shifts as urgent signals. Her system assumes something is wrong and it must be addressed immediately. Here's the part no one tells you. When you raise your voice slightly, even just slightly, it doesn't register to her as emphasis. It registers as danger. When you go cold and logical, it doesn't register as maturity. It registers as abandonment. Her brain doesn't separate content from tone. It absorbs your emotional state first, then interprets your words through it. That's why you can be 100% right and still lose. In fact, being right often makes it worse, because certainty without warmth feels like rejection. There's a reason for this, and it isn't culture. It's biology. For most of human history, women survived by reading emotional subtleties. Infants don't speak. They shift their breathing. They change their tone. They tighten their body. A woman who couldn't read that died out. The ones who survived were emotional sensors. That same sensitivity never turned off. It just redirected toward you. So when your voice tightens, when your patience thins, when your energy shifts, even if you say nothing, her system hears it loud and clear. This is where men make their first fatal mistake. They respond to emotional escalation with pressure. Firmer voice, stronger words, more logic. They think authority comes from intensity. But intensity is fuel. Every ounce of frustration you add doesn't resolve the argument. It feeds the amplification loop. You speak louder to be understood. She reacts stronger to protect herself. You feel disrespected. She feels unsafe. Now you're no longer two adults solving a problem. You're two nervous systems colliding. Most men walk away from these moments thinking the same thing. She's impossible, but that's not true. What's impossible is trying to lead emotionally while broadcasting irritation. You cannot calm a system you're actively triggering. You cannot create peace with the same energy that caused the unrest. And here's the brutal truth most men never accept. If she's escalating, it's because something in your tone came first. Not your words, your energy. This leads men to swing to the opposite extreme. They shut down, they go flat. Emotionless, measured, silent. They think this is control. Stoicism, strength. But to her nervous system, it feels like the ground disappearing. Emotional absence is worse than emotional conflict. At least anger means engagement. Silence feels like abandonment in real time. That's why she pushes harder when you pull away. She's not trying to win. She's trying to feel you again. So now you're trapped between two bad options. Speak with emotion and trigger escalation. Speak without emotion and trigger panic. This is where most men give up and accept fighting as inevitable. They're wrong. There is a third position, and it's the one men were never taught. Emotional leadership without emotional leakage. warmth without weakness, firmness without force. This is where conflict dies before it's born. Here's the rule most men miss. Women don't fight for dominance. They fight for emotional safety. Even when it looks aggressive, even when it sounds irrational, the driver underneath is the same question. Are we okay? When your tone answers that question with calm certainty, her system settles. When it answers with irritation or distance, her system attacks. You don't stop fights by winning points. You stop them by stabilizing the emotional environment. And this leads to a realization that changes everything. Arguments are not problems, they're feedback. They reveal where your emotional presence cracked. They expose where your patience thinned. They show you exactly how much influence your tone has and how much power you've been giving away by ignoring it. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. And once you learn how to control this layer, conflict stops being something you survive. It becomes something you never enter in the first place. Because the moment you understand how her emotional system reads you, you stop reacting. You start leading. And in the next chapter, you're going to see why some women can never be peaceful and why choosing wrong guarantees a life of arguments, no matter how perfectly you speak. By the time most men realize the relationship is chaotic, it's already too late. They're invested, attached, rationalizing, and that's the real trap. Conflict doesn't usually come from what you say. It comes from who you chose. Some women don't react to peace by relaxing. They react to peace by getting bored. And boredom to them feels like death. So they manufacture tension just to feel alive again. No tone, no strategy, no method will save you from that. Understanding this is not bitterness, it's discernment. There are women whose nervous systems are calibrated to volatility. Calm feels alien. Stability feels suspicious. When things are going well, they wait for something bad to happen or create it. You'll notice it early if you're watching instead of hoping. She has a long list of toxic exes. Everyone wronged her. Every story has a villain, and it's never her. Peaceful moments don't soften her, they irritate her. She pokes, tests, provokes. Not because you failed, but because chaos is familiar. Men make a classic mistake here. They think, if I just handle this better, she'll calm down. If I'm more patient, more understanding, more solid. But you cannot regulate another adult's emotional addiction. Some personalities don't seek resolution, they seek stimulation. And arguing with them is not a misunderstanding, it's participation. Every time you engage, you reward the behavior. Every time you try to explain, you justify it. And every time you stay, you teach her that chaos works. This is why selection is the first skill, not communication. The man who wants peace but chooses a woman who feeds on intensity signs his own sentence. Conflict begins long before your first disagreement. It begins the moment you ignore red flags because attraction overrides judgment. You confuse chemistry for compatibility. You mistake emotional intensity for connection. And slowly, without realizing it, your nervous system adapts to constant stress. You stop noticing how tense you become because tension becomes normal. Peaceful women exist, but they are invisible to men addicted to challenge. Quiet stability doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't spark adrenaline. It doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like a deep breath. And many men don't trust that feeling. They equate calm with boring because no one taught them that peace is a luxury earned through discipline and choice. Drama feels earned, peace feels suspicious. So they reject it without knowing why. Here's a hard rule. Women who cannot self-soothe will always outsource regulation to you. Their emotions become your problem. Their stress becomes your responsibility. Their dissatisfaction becomes your failure. And no matter how well you handle it, the bar will keep moving. Because the discomfort isn't coming from you. It's coming from inside her. You didn't cause it. You can't fix it. And staying only guarantees escalation. Assuming you've chosen well, now the real work begins. This is where men make their second major mistake. They believe the solution to conflict is emotional neutrality. No anger, no softness. Just calm logic. On paper, it sounds right. In practice, it backfires because emotional flatness doesn't feel safe to women. It feels like distance, A man who goes cold during tension may feel controlled, but to her, he feels gone. Her brain doesn't separate calm from disengaged the way yours does. When your tone loses warmth, her system hears withdrawal. And withdrawal, to a woman's nervous system, signals danger. Not rejection as an idea, but abandonment as a threat. So she pushes, raises her voice, escalates the issue. Not to conquer you, but to pull you back into emotional presence. Any presence. Even anger is better than absence. This is why men feel confused. They stayed calm, rational, respectful, and somehow that made everything worse. From her side, the message wasn't your words. It was your emotional availability dropping. Masculine logic says, remove emotion to de-escalate. Feminine perception says, emotion equals connection. Remove it, and the bond feels broken. So she fights to restore it, even if the method is messy. The answer isn't emotional suppression. It's emotional containment. A grounded warmth that doesn't leak frustration or judgment, but also doesn't disappear. Think less steel wall, more solid anchor. Present stable, unmoved. When she feels that steadiness, her system has no reason to panic, no reason to fight, because the relationship feels secure in your presence, not threatened by your tone. And this is where everything shifts, because once you stop choosing chaos and stop confusing coldness with strength, you step into a different form of authority, one that doesn't need volume, one that doesn't need explanations, one that makes arguments feel unnecessary before they even start. In the next chapter, you'll see the exact techniques, how to correct, disagree, and set boundaries in a way that makes women soften instead of resist, and why real power never sounds like force. Real authority doesn't announce itself. It settles the room. By the time conflict reaches the surface, something underneath has already shifted, and a man who understands this never rushes to correct behavior before stabilizing emotion. This is where most men fail. They move straight to content, facts, logic, boundaries. But correction without emotional safety feels like judgment. And judgment, no matter how justified, always invites resistance. So the first move is never the boundary. The first move is presence. When you speak, your tone must answer one question before she even hears your words. Are we safe right now? Not safe as in comfortable, but safe as in grounded. Your voice has to carry certainty without tension, warmth without apology. This is why yelling fails and silence fails too. One threatens, the other disappears. What works is calm engagement. You're here, you're steady, you're not shaken, and you're not leaving. Once her nervous system registers that baseline, the fight loses its fuel. Here's the strange truth. Women don't resist boundaries. They resist feeling pushed outside of connection. When a boundary is delivered with irritation, it feels like rejection. When it's delivered with warmth, it feels like leadership. Same words, different energy. A man who says, I'm not okay with that from a grounded place becomes respected. A man who says it with frustration invites escalation. She's not reacting to the boundary. She's reacting to how it makes her feel about her place with you. This is where correction becomes guidance instead of conflict. Instead of framing issues as her mistakes, you frame them as shared adjustments. Not, you're wrong, but this doesn't work for us. Not, you need to stop, but here's what I need. Language matters, but tone matters more. When your voice stays relaxed, your words land softer, even when they're firm. And paradoxically, the firmer you are without edge, the safer she feels. There's a shift that happens when you do this consistently. She stops testing with chaos and starts responding with cooperation, not because she's submissive, but because her system no longer needs to push to find stability. You've become predictable in the right way, calm under pressure, warm under disagreement, unmoved without being detached. This is emotional containment, the ability to hold tension without spilling it back at her. And now, something subtle changes. Conflict stops being frequent. Disagreements still happen, but they don't turn into battles. She speaks, you listen without collapsing. You respond without attacking, you correct without shaming. She adjusts without resentment. What used to be a trigger becomes a moment of trust. Because every time tension appears and you remain steady, her system learns, I don't need to fight here. Men who master this realize something important. Influence doesn't come from force. It comes from reliability, from being the calm center when emotions rise, from not matching intensity with intensity, from not withdrawing when things get uncomfortable. The man who can stay emotionally present without losing himself becomes rare. And rarity creates respect. Respect creates peace. This doesn't mean you never walk away. Strength also means knowing when to stop engaging. If correction is met with manipulation, if calm is met with provocation, if boundaries are punished instead of respected, you don't argue harder, you disengage. Peace is not negotiated with someone who profits from chaos. Emotional leadership includes the courage to leave environments that refuse stability.